welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the young adult fantasy Firian Rising, and this is English Nerd. So we are still in the middle of the Tale of Two Cities series, and will be until the end, obviously. So thanks for hanging in there with me. If you've been watching all of these, that's awesome. Today we're looking at Book 3, Chapters 4 and 5. That's Calm and Storm and the Wood Sawyer. Calm and Storm, in particular, has some really important symbolic significance. If you've read the book, then you probably picked up on some of it. If this is your first time around, this is a great place for you to kind of test your analytical skills and see if you can make a bunch of connections to other scenes, other characters, to the themes. It connects a lot of dots and heads off in a few different directions as well. So, Chapter 4, Calm in Storm, it picks up after the Defarges have visited Lucy, Minette, and Little Lucy. I guess they're Darnays now, and Lucy felt that there was this kind of shadow attending Madame Defarge that made her afraid. Darnay is in prison in La Force, and basically everybody is in Paris, almost every character that we've met so far. There are a couple exceptions, but they are few and far between. So Chapter 4 is really another montage kind of chapter like we got in Book 2, Chapter 21 with the echoing footsteps with the storming of the Bastille, where we get updates on everybody and time passing. But the updates are quite important, much like they were in Chapter 21. So Dr. Minette went out and essentially saved Darnay from the prison massacre in just a couple of chapters ago, and he's continuing to go back to La Force and make sure that nobody, accidentally kills Darnay. And the reason that Dr. Minette has all this sway is that he is a survivor of the Bastille. And so, because he went through that injustice, he now has all this strength. So he's an excellent example of that idea that people are mysteries. Because we never could have predicted that he would be the hero in this moment when everything seems so fearful. So he continues to go back and forth between the prison. In the prison massacre, there were 1,100 people who were killed. So it's very dangerous and horrible. And there's this kind of makeshift tribunal that sets itself up to judge the different prisoners. And again, it's a mockery of a trial, kind of like we saw a mockery of a trial at the gate of Paris when Darnay first arrived. And honestly, not that much better the Old Bailey trial at the beginning of the story. So another more trial motif stuff. So there's a makeshift tribunal, and a bunch of more people get executed. And Darnay, again, is spared because Dr. Minette has so much sway, and Defarge is able to say, yes, this is Dr. Minette, this is the one that many of you have seen, he is who he says he is, we should take his testimony seriously. So they do. And so I'm just going to read something for you here. After that tribunal is initially described, it says, "The mad joy over the prisoners who were saved had astounded him, Dr. Minette, scarcely less than the mad ferocity against those who were cut to pieces." I mean, it's just these revolutionaries have gone from being honestly right in a lot of ways to being animal-like. We saw that in the Grindstone chapter, and we see that here. Now, at the beginning of this whole series, I talked about how one of the major themes is the idea of reason versus emotion. And we have people like Mr. Lorry who represent reason. But I haven't actually talked about anybody who represents emotion. I always have students who assume that Lucy, for instance, represents emotion, and there's a case to be made for that. She is a very emotional person. She's like the best of emotion. And what we see here with the revolutionaries is the worst of emotion, people only acting on impulse and not having any reason at all. They're all feeling. Basically, mobs are all feeling. We do get a bit more of a measured view since Lucy also acts on emotion. It's not just reason good, emotion bad, but we see how horrible and destructive living only by emotion can be. And that's actually one of the things that the French Revolution historically showed the Romantics as well, and kind of led to a shift away from just that. Anywho, the doctor is now in the position, because of his status, to restore, it says, to restore the dearest part of herself, of Lucy, back to her. And that language is almost exactly the same language as was used in book 1 when Mr. Lorry said, oh yeah, your dad's alive, he's been found. And Lucy's job, when they went to go fetch Dr. Manette, was to restore him to life. And a couple other things, but to restore him to life. And here, now, Dr. Manette, their positions are literally reversed. Instead of Lucy being in the position to restore Dr. Manette, now Dr. Manette's in the position to restore Lucy, or, what she sees as her life, which is Charles Darnay. So, lots of cool things happening here. I'm just going to cut to the chase. At the end of this chapter, we have I consider it like the official introduction of the guillotine. It's been mentioned a couple of times before this, but this is really the moment when we get the guillotine. And the language that's used, the images, the way that people respond to the guillotine is enormously important to the point of this book, I think, especially part 3. Part 3, the guillotine is just of paramount importance, so bear with me for a second. We're going to do some analysis. Okay, it says, above all, one hideous figure grew as familiar as if it had been before the general gaze, before the foundations of the world, the figure of the sharp female called La Guillotine. So it's the rise of the guillotine. Before we get the description that follows, it's interesting that it's a female La Guillotine. I think there are two reasons come to mind that Dickens would do that. One, it's pretty common that if you name something that you love, a boat or a car or a horse or whatever, it's going to have a female name. And so here we have something that is beloved in a way. La Guillotine, it's given this female name. So listen to this. It was a popular theme for jests. It was the best cure for headache. It infallibly prevented the hair from turning gray. It imparted a peculiar delicacy to the complexion. It was the national razor which shaved close. Who kissed La Guillotine, looked through the little window, and sneezed into the sack. It was the sign of the regeneration of the human race. It superseded the cross. Now here's the part right here. Models of it were worn on breasts from which the cross was discarded, and it was bowed down to and believed in where the cross was denied. It was the sign of the regeneration of the human race. That is extremely important. So that brings me to a comparison that Dickens clearly wants us to draw between the guillotine and the cross and their symbolic significance. We'll start with some similarities. They're both worshipped, essentially. They're both worn around people's necks, depending on what their beliefs are. I actually had a student a few years ago who found a guillotine necklace online, and so one day he came to class and he pulled it out, and I went, it exists, I guess. That's amazing. Part of me was really horrified, and part of me was really intrigued, because I love this part of the book. But anyway, both of them, the guillotine and the cross, are also signs of the regeneration of the human race. That's super important. They represent this kind of hope for the future. And they're both means of death as well. The cross was a device for execution, and the guillotine was a device for execution. And yet they both represent something that is generally more positive. Okay, so breaking it down, obviously they're not identical symbols. There are some fundamental differences. So who's being sacrificed, what they're being sacrificed for, what's the motivation, and all of that. So taking the cross first, the more known symbol. So the cross is motivated by love. It represents forgiveness for sins, right? Perhaps most importantly, it represents self-sacrifice for the sake of others. for an inner transformation. Self-sacrifice for the sake of others. Okay, the guillotine, by comparison, is motivated by hatred and fueled by this desire for revenge. It's about outer transformation, societal transformation, instead of something that happens inside. And, again, perhaps most importantly, on that side, it is the sacrifice of others for oneself. It's the inverse of what the cross represents. Now, I tend to have a really awesome day at school when I'm teaching this bit, just because I have the students compare and contrast, like what are the similarities, what are the differences between these two, what they represent, what they are, and it tends to fuel really amazing discussion. My eyes are open like every time, and I've taught this book for 10 years, which is pretty nuts. But these are some of the points that I like to make sure are covered, because they are so important. So this is a comparison that Dickens wants us to keep in mind throughout the rest of the story. Here he brings it up. They're both signs of the regeneration of the human race, although in very different ways. And we see in, at the end, a few chapters at the end, in fact, some of these ideas going head to head more directly. And so I'll bring that up again, but I just wanted to make sure to pause here, make sure that you get that, and that you see some of the cool things that Dickens is doing with that comparison. So the chapter ends with that 1 year and 3 months go by. A year and 3 months. That feels like an eternity, I'm sure, to Lucy and Pross and all those people who are stuck in Paris, because nobody leaves. Everybody who comes to Paris basically stays in Paris because Darnay is in prison. So a year and 3 months go by. Chapter 5, the Wood Sawyer, opens with that reminder. So now it is 1793, and we've reached the final year of A Tale of Two Cities. It's all going to culminate there in 1793 at last. Once we find out that the violence is heating up, we have more red wine for the guillotine, as Darnay says, then we get some news. It's small news, but I think we, especially during this time when people are mostly quarantined or at least isolated for the most part, we can understand how this small bit of news is actually news. So Dr. Manette comes to Lucy and says that he's figured out that Darnay is in a place in the prison of La Force where sometimes, not every day, but sometimes between these hours, Darnay will be able to look down out of this window and see this corner of the street. And so Lucy gets pretty excited. She gathers little Lucy and she stands there for 2 hours every day, the window when he might be able to look out, and just in case he might be able to see her there and gain strength, right? So it says, rain or shine, she would wait there 2 hours. She never missed a single day. So whenever Darnay was able to look out that window, she would be there, giving him strength, which is nice. It's a low key way of seeing that this is it's people being the best in the worst of times. Their goodness sort of shining out even at these miserable moments, which is cool. So then the Wood Sawyer. The Wood Sawyer, that's the name of the chapter and the name of the character that is introduced, I guess, in this chapter. He's not really introduced, he's just changed jobs and we don't know what his real name is. It's the mender of roads, guys! Now instead of mending roads, he chops wood, I guess, and says awkward kind of Kermit the Frog meme style things. So, for instance, walking here again, citizeness? He asks. You see me, citizen, because apparently they have to address themselves like this, like they're in the USSR, practically. So the Wood Sawyer, who was a little man with a redundancy of gesture, he had once been a mender of roads, cast a glance at the prison, pointed at the prison, and putting his 10 fingers before his face to represent bars, peeped through them jocosely. "But it's not my business," said he, and went on sawing his wood. So all this coyness goes on for a long time until it kind of comes to, I was going to say comes to a head. It's a pretty bad pun. Anyway, so the mender of roads says, "Okay, it's not my business. My work is my business. See my saw? I call it the little guillotine." So he just keeps bothering Lucy as she's standing there. And little Lucy. Little Lucy's there too. Everybody forgets about her or treats her badly, but there she is. "I call it my little guillotine," says the Wood Sawyer. La 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 la. And off his head comes, and he chops this piece of wood. So, of course, if you're Lucy, you're looking, going, "You're such a creeper." But the creepiness continues and intensifies. He says, "I call myself the Samson of the firewood guillotine. See here again. Lo, 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 lo." And off her head comes. So we have his head, her head. Now a child. Tickle, tickle, pickle, pickle. And off its head comes. All the family. His, hers, its. He's clearly talking about Darnay, Lucy, and little Lucy. This is like the second time that Lucy's been called just an it in just a few pages. Poor thing. I mean, she's 10 years old at this point. Good gracious. Even if she were much younger, this is just not right. So it's a not so veiled threat that he sees what she's doing, that she's sympathizing with the prisoner, which is itself considered to be a crime, and he could turn her in, you know? That's all. So it's very tense. It's very tense, especially considering what we know that that the Lucys are both on Madame Defarge's register. They're officially on the list. One more thing about the guillotine. It says that he calls it Little Saint Guillotine, which again is this religious language. Clearly the religion of revenge has replaced the actual religion of Christianity among these revolutionaries. Okay, the chapter ends kind of strangely. We get people dancing around the corner. The dance is called the Carmagnole, and the description of it is more like a fight than a dance. It says that they dance like 5,000 demons. They keep time like the gnashing of teeth in unison. They strike and clutch and tear. It's a mob, clearly, and they're psyching themselves up for something. Like they're getting rid of this violent energy, or they're building up this violent energy. And the Carmagnole is one of the clearest places where we see that logic has utterly abandoned these people. We can look at Madame Defarge and say, man, she's cold. Utterly without compassion, but you can't say she doesn't have some logic. I mean, she's a good planner. Here, though, with the Carmagnole and the insane rush of feeling, we can only say that this is emotion. No fight could have been half as terrible as this dance. So that's how the chapter ends, and they learn that finally Darnay is going to get another trial, and their hope is that he'll be released after that trial, but obviously their hope is kind of thin, even though Dr. Manette is in his corner. So yeah, those are those two chapters. Let me know if you have any questions down below, and like this video if you like it. Make sure to subscribe if you have not done so already, and I will see you very soon.